month. Trade-ins. Rusty, about threw me today. I came in and there's this brand new black, okay, maybe not brand new, but I don't know what year it is, but it was pretty. There's a brand new, to me at least, Dodge Ram or a Ram pickup truck, and it's a pretty looking one, Rusty. Just reminds us, trade-ins. When I was growing up, my dad could never afford a decent car. My dad was a pastor who always short on cash, and he did a lot of, we grew up in Australia, and so we did a lot of outback meetings. My dad would travel the country, and anyone who needed a decent car would have been my dad, but he never could afford one. So we grew up with classic cars. Okay, they were classic in the sense that they were old, and in fact, they're very collected today. But when my dad was driving them, they were not collectible. They were worn out. We drove old Cortinas. We drove old Holdens. We drove old Mercedes-Benz buses. We drove it across the board. And if it had a little bit of life in it, my dad would buy it cheap off of somebody who was needing to get rid of a junk car. And then he would totally wear the thing out. I say this because I grew up almost every week getting under one of those cars and trying to get it fixed. My dad would be out. He'd have to on the weekend, on the Sundays, he would go. He'd have a meeting in our church and locally, and then in the evening he would travel about 3.5 hours out one direction to go hold meetings in another church, and then sometimes during the middle of the week he would travel another 2 hours. He was constantly putting miles on those old cars, which means we were constantly replacing fan belts. We were constantly having to replace timing belts and timing chains that would get worn out. We would be working on transmissions and replacing plugs and points, and some of you know what points are, they had them back in the day. Can I say I love classic cars, but I hate to work on them. I can't tell you how many engines we had to pull out and totally rebuild, recondition, how many transmissions we would have to be going to junkyards I hate working on cars. I'm to a point now where I don't even want to change my own oil. I just despise it. I so wanted my dad to get his old car and trade it in for something decent. And the only problem was the cars my dad was driving, there was not a dealer who would ever want that car for a trade-in. I bring this up because as we go through life, it is almost like we have emotional cars we drive. All of us find ourselves going through life driving emotional cars, and all of us have a different emotional car that we're getting through that we're having to deal with. Our past experiences that we've been through teach us how we are to act and react, and sometimes we find ourselves living with emotions that we don't really want. We find ourselves face to face reacting and acting out in ways that are hurtful, that are damaging. And in a sense, we kind of look at it like my dad's old cars, and we just wish there was a way we could do an emotional trade-in. We're going to start today. How do we begin to trade in emotions that we don't want for ones that are healthier? How do we live? Because as followers of Jesus Christ, God calls us to live lives that are abundant, that are victorious, And we kind of go, well, that sounds great, but how do we do it? Now, we're going to start with this first one because we've just come through Halloween. We're going to deal with this idea of fear. Now, I know we've finished Halloween, and as we kind of revel in this whole idea of living in fear for a month, don't we? I mean, some of you guys deck your houses out in, I don't know, skeletons, ghosts. My neighbor has a guillotine in his front yard. All things gore and fear we kind of revel in for a few days. And we kind of have fun with it. But I want to talk about the reality of fear. As that those of us who really deal with fear know that fear is no fun. We wish, for those of us who deal with fear, we have this inbuilt thing where we wish we had this untamed wild courage. Okay, that's kind of, I don't know if anybody's really thought of it in that terms, but that's the way we look at it. We kind of play on this idea of fear, and we watch spooky movies, and we kind of darken everything. But the reality is that fear is not fun. Now, before I go any farther, can I just be real with you? The idea of untamed wild courage is as dangerous and is as destructive as fear. This morning, I want to stop and just be honest with you. The reality of fear is actually good. We're going to look at two sides of this, but we're going to talk about how to trade in our fear for peace. I'm scared to use the word courage because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is standing up and doing what we need to in the midst of our fears. But I do want to talk about this idea, how do we trade in our fear for peace? The reality is this. Fear is actually, should be, can be healthy. God gave us the emotion of fear for a reason. Fear is what keeps us out of trouble. Those who do not have any fear get themselves in all sorts of trouble. Fear is what gives us a rational response to situations that we have all experienced. Have you ever found yourself where you accidentally got too close to the stove and you burnt your hand on the stove? The next time you get there, you kind of hold back, and it's a good reason you do that. Because experience has told you that if I get too close, I will get burned. Have you ever found yourself where you've ended up in the past, where you spent more money than you made, and you found yourself in all sorts of financial stress, and as you go through and you learn, I don't want to be there again, I don't want to do that, and so we begin to hold back because fear teaches us to have a rational response. Fear helps us to see outcomes that may be, if we just take some common sense. Fear keeps us from standing too close to the edge at the Grand Canyon, because if you get too close, you might fall. Fear is what helps us and protects us. But one of the things that we do know is that a lot of the fear that we have is not actually healthy. We know that fear can be good, and we know that fear is an emotion that God gives us to protect us, but so much of our fear gets to a place where it becomes damaging and hurtful. It causes us to become paralyzed over things that never are. We know this. Fear causes health problems. It causes your blood pressure to spike and your heart rate to rise. We know that fear, it increases, by the way, if you really want to know what fear does to your health. It's an amazing thing. There's this little gland in the back of your brain which releases all sorts of it sets off a trigger of health problems, uncontrolled fear. But it's not just bad for us physically, but fear is also bad for us emotionally. Fear is what causes us to continue to have irrational thoughts, causes us to believe that there are outcomes that are going to happen that never do happen. It tells us that we're not good enough. It keeps us from trying new things. It keeps us always holding back. Fear is not only bad for us physically, it's not only bad for us emotionally, we know it's bad for us relationally. It causes us to believe that people are out to get us. It causes people to look over their shoulders, always concerned. Fear, it damages us relationally. Fear not only hurts us physically, it not only hurts us emotionally, it not only hurts us relationally, but you know what? Fear will also hurt you spiritually. The problem with fear when it comes to spirituality is that it makes us look at our lives and it says, God, you do not care. You are not protecting me. God, why did you make me like this? God, have you abandoned me? God, where are you at? And it will keep you always questioning what God has done for you. Now, I want to be honest with you. I do not want to downplay. I do not want to minimize the fear that we have. Most of us have fears for a reason. There's something that has happened in our life that has caused us to grow up being afraid. And I am not trying to say this morning there are any 3 easy steps and you will no longer have fear. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to be honest with you. I am one of these pastors who will probably go the other direction and just tell you like this. If you have uncontrolled fear now, I have no easy answers for you. I am not going to pretend like we can pray over you and it's going to disappear. It is not. What I am going to tell you this, I'm going to tell you this is if you need to get extra help, you need to get extra help. But I also want to tell you this, that as a follower of Jesus Christ, God gives us some answers to help us work on and to try to help control our fears. God gives us and God desires that we learn how to trade our fear in for peace. Now, we're going to start today, as we go through this series, I want to start with a young guy by the name of Timothy. Paul, the apostle, became an almost father figure. He became a mentor to a young pastor by the name of Timothy. Now, Timothy grew up in a home where he had a very strong grandmother and a very strong mother, and we know his dad had been a Greek non-believer, is what we believe, and more than likely had passed away when Timothy was still a young man. We don't know what necessarily Timothy had been through, but as Paul is writing Timothy, we know that Timothy struggled with fear and anxiety. He's a young man, he's a young pastor, and he still is struggling with this idea of anxiety and fear that is beginning to hold him back. So Paul begins to write Timothy, and he's concerned for Timothy, and as he's trying to mentor him, he begins to try to help him. Here's what we can do. Now, I'm just going to be clear. The Bible is full of dealing on this topic of fear. This is by no means, this is no easy answer. What we're about to deal with is not a solution in 3 easy steps, and you will no longer be afraid. It requires 1995 as well. Just kidding. But what Paul is going to try to help Timothy understand is that there are some processes that we can begin to put in place that can help us to get a grasp or to help trade our fear for peace. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul is writing to Timothy, and he's dealing with this idea of the anxiety and the fear that Timothy is having. And so I want to start this morning, and I'm going to read 2 Timothy 1, verses 5 through 7. And Paul writes Timothy, and he says, I remember your genuine faith, for you shared the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. And I know that same faith continues strong in you. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift that God gave you when I laid my hands on you. Now, Paul is a young pastor, and Paul had helped Timothy transition into his ministry and into becoming a pastor. Paul goes on to say this, Timothy, now I added that word in, okay, that's not in there. But he looks at him and he says, Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear and of timidity, but of power and of love and self-discipline. Paul is writing to Timothy and says, Timothy, God desires that you trade your fear and your anxiety in for three things. Now, there's a lot more, and if you come Tuesday night, once again, my shameless plug for Tuesday night home group at 6:30 with coffee, cookies, and good conversation. Okay. We're going to delve into this just a little bit more. But Paul looks at Timothy, and as he's talking to Timothy, he's writing him this letter. He says, Timothy, I know that the faith you have is real, and I'm not doubting it. It was real in you. It was real in your grandmother. It's real in your mother. Hey, I know what you have been through. But I want to tell you, Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity. Instead, he desires that we trade these things in for three different things. And he names three things. Now, the first thing that Paul goes on to tell Timothy that he needs to trade his fear in for, the first one is of power. He says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and of timidity, but of power and of love and self-discipline. Paul is not trying to give Timothy a self-help, self-determination, here you go, a little bit of positive thinking. As he stops and he looks at Timothy and says, for God has given us a spirit of, not of fear and timidity, but of power. He's not talking about if you just think it, it will come to pass. This word power is not the idea that somehow you are just this amazing man, and if you just tell it, you can believe it. If you just tell yourself enough, you can do it. I mean, we do that all the time, right? We talk ourselves, we try to manifest our feelings, I think a lot of people call it. If you just say it, I can believe it. I think I can. I think, the little train that could. We teach our kids this. Paul's not trying to tell Timothy that. What Paul is telling us is this word power has to do with supernatural power. In other words, he has to do with this idea of relationship. For God has not given you the spirit of fear, but he gives you a personal relationship with the creator of the universe. This idea of power that is used, it's an interesting Greek word, it's dunamis. It has to do with where we get our idea of dynamite from. But it has to do with supernatural power. It has to do with the idea that God comes to be with us. When we give our life to Jesus Christ, our faith in him allows him to come and give us strength. So what Paul is trying to remind Timothy is, Timothy, your fear is it's unfounded because you have someone who is with you to strengthen you. You need to remind yourself. You need to call out to him. You need to learn to rely on him. Okay. Paul's trying to get Timothy to change his mindset. Not about the situation that Timothy is looking at, not about the situation that Timothy is worried or concerned over, but about the one who is walking with him. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, the writer of the book of Hebrews people believe that Paul also wrote the book of Hebrews. We're not sure. But the writer of the book of Hebrews says this, "So let us come boldly to the throne of grace. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most." What is the writer of the book of Hebrews and Paul telling us? Is not that God removes us from the situations that is causing the fear. Don't ever think that if you just pray that the situation poofs and our fear walks away. That's not what we're called to. What Paul is reminding us, and the book of Hebrews is reminding us, is that we go with, or God walks with us in the middle of our fears. You're not alone. You know, when fear rises and gets the most dangerous is when we see ourselves as alone. The times you become most afraid is usually 3 o'clock in the morning when you wake up and something begins to prey on your mind, and all you can do is think about and obsess over something, and you feel all alone. Paul is trying to remind Timothy, you are not abandoned. You are not alone. You have a heavenly Father. Your earthly father may have passed away, Timothy, when you were young, but you have a heavenly Father who is with you. For God has not given us the spirit of fear. Instead, he gave us himself. He goes with us. He walks with us. He is with us. He continues, though, and doesn't stop there and doesn't say, Timothy, God gives us the spirit of power. He moves on and he says in 2 Timothy chapter 5, verse 7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power and of love. Okay, now when we hear this word love, he's not talking about the pitter-patter. You've all been, I know most all of you have fallen in love at some point in your life, and you have felt the pitter-patters, you've had the butterflies, you've had God's not talking about that kind of love. Paul's not telling Timothy, you're going to fall in love, and it's all going to be okay. You won't have any more fear when you fall in love. The word love that Paul is telling Timothy is the idea, he uses a word, if you've ever been in church or you've seen it on another church, agape. It's the idea of self-sacrifice. What Paul is telling Timothy is that when fear begins to come into your life, when fear begins to take over, you need to trade love or trade your fear for your understanding that you have a God who is with you. Number two, you have to change your attitude towards one of others and self-sacrifice. When fear begins to grip, Paul is reminding Timothy, if you get your mind off of yourself and you begin to think of others, you lose the place for fear. It's not that you don't have it. It's not that the situation changes. It's that you don't have time to look at it and to think about it. When we get our eyes off of our own problems and we begin to look at others, things sometimes get a little more clear. He continues, Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear and of timidity, fear or timidity, but of power, of love. And then he uses one that we all know. And if you want the self-help, here it is. It's self-discipline. Timothy, I want you to trade your fear and your timidity in for self-discipline. What you're going through is not going to magically disappear because you pray a prayer. Now, I get that. But you do need, Timothy, you do need to learn to pray. You need to learn to rely on God. You need to learn to hand it over to him. You need to boldly say, God, I'm coming. I'm going to give this to you. I know this situation is not disappearing. God, I'm going to get my eyes off myself. I'm going to look out towards others and what others need and how I can help someone else. And then Paul says you need to have self-discipline. You're just going to have to get up every morning, Timothy. Put your shoes on. Look at the day, face it, and get out there. Paul is not trying to make this an easy self-help, everything disappears and all your fear is gone. Paul is dealing with an idea that as we face our fears and the things that cause us to be paralyzed, we need to face it with someone. You have a God. You have a Creator who loves you, who died for you, who promises to walk with you if you've given your life to Him. You need to learn to rely on Him. You're going to need to learn to call out to Him. Come boldly to Him. You have a Creator who calls us to look out towards others. You need to get your eyes off yourself, Timothy. Stop focusing on your problems and start looking at someone else's. And Timothy, then you need some self-discipline to just do this every day. The situation is not about to disappear simply because you've prayed a magic prayer and the situation now poofs away. It doesn't. In fact, for those of us who are in our early morning home group or our early morning Bible study, we kind of were talking about this and how God saved Peter and let James be put to death. Why did He do this? I don't know. We don't always have answers. What we do have is someone who walks with us. What we do have is the call to look out for the needs of others. What we must do is consistently, day in, day out, get up, face our fears. God, I'm coming to you. I'm going to hand them over to you again. And whatever this day brings, it's yours. Help me now to see others as you see them. And help me just to do this with your help. Self-discipline. Easy 3 steps? No. Because if it was that easy to get rid of fear, we would all get rid of it, wouldn't we? But as we begin to practice, as we begin to hold on to a hope that you have a Savior who walks with you, who loves you, who died for you, who has a better plan for you, who has made a way for you to be in relationship to Him and has stopped and made you to have a place and a home with Him. What can man do to me? What shall I fear? You see, the early followers of Jesus Christ found themselves within this situation. The early followers of Jesus Christ, right after Jesus left, many of them began to face being persecuted, having their houses confiscated. They were chased out of town. They got to a point where they gladly, and in spite of all these things, the church exploded, and people, instead of running from Jesus Christ, they began to run to Him because their whole thinking was this: if He can raise from the dead and He wants a relationship with me, I'm following Him. There's got to be something better. What's the worst you can do? Going to kill me? I know the one who died and rose again. We need to get our eyes off ourselves, see the needs that are around us. And then we need to have some self-discipline to just get up and continue on. Face it where we're at. Look, I wish when I was growing up, I wish my dad could have traded his car in. Man, I tell you, if my dad would have gotten a car that was any less than 10 years old, I would have thought we had a brand new car. Most of my dad's cars were over 15 to 20 years old. I wanted him to trade that in so bad. Dad, get a good car. Get a decent car. You know what? I know all of us find ourselves with driving emotional vehicles that stop us from becoming and being what we know we could be. Most of us have at certain times in our life found ourselves face to face with fear. And some of you have very little fear. Others of us face it daily. What do? Let's learn to trade it in. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. I want to close with this verse, and we're going to close and we'll pray right after this. In the book of Romans, Paul was talking about the love that God has for us. And he says this in Romans chapter 8, verse 37. Despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through our Christ who loves us. Let's bow our heads in prayer.